leverage unless he, because of the control of the Zionist lobby in Congress, he's never going to use the leverage, even if he wants to, until he is pushed to do so by informed public opinion. One might say by demonstrations of real democracy in action. The problem in America, and frankly in Europe, but most of all in America, is that most citizens are too uninformed and misinformed to do the pushing. And that is frankly because the media has been complicit with Zionism in suppressing the truth of history as it relates to the making and sustaining of the conflict. So I think it's very simple.
And what about the present? What about these demonstrations and conflicts that we're seeing in the Middle East at the moment? What's your view of how the media's coped with that?
I think generally speaking the coverage has been okay, but the whole thing is exciting but also frightening to me, because I think the message that all the autocrats have got from Mubarak's departure is, if our people take to the streets and start demonstrating, shoot them. I mean, that's what seems to be happening. But I think the key, frankly, is in Egypt. And I tell you why. I think that they probably will evolve to an elected government, because the pressure, the generals may not like it, but the pressure is there. So let's assume down the road, 9 months, 10 months, there is an elected government. You then have the fascinating problem of the separate peace with Israel. Now, how the hell does a new government handle that? There is a way in which they could do it very cleverly and maybe change everything in the Middle East. If the new government said, we'll have a referendum on this treaty. Now, if there was a referendum, my guess is that 80% of Egyptians would say, tear it up. We don't want it. It hasn't served our interests. It hasn't served the Arab interests. It's only re-entrenched Israel. Now, with that kind of referendum result, a new government in Cairo could say to America, you've heard our people speak. You say you like democracy. They don't want this treaty, but we'll have the treaty, we'll keep it, if you use your leverage on Israel to get them out of the occupied territories. Now, what a fascinating scenario that would provide.
Okay, let's take it back a bit and let's talk a bit about Syria, because that's the current country that's entering into this whole process at the moment. Europe and the US have reiterated calls for UN sanctions, but it's a country that's been under international pressure for a long time over its ties to Iran and its support for Hezbollah and Hamas. How serious do you think this threat of sanctions is?
Well, maybe it is serious, but so what? I don't think young Assad is in control. I think Assad is probably more or less a prisoner of his generals and the security services. He gave the world the impression when he came to power, what, 10, 11 years ago, that he was going to be not like his father, who was a tyrant. He was going to be a reformer. I suspect that probably was the genuine son of the father. But I think right now he is probably, as I say, a prisoner. And they're just going to shoot and shoot and shoot. And rather like the Israelis don't give a damn about what the world thinks, I don't think Syria's security forces will either.
Some say this call for sanctions is the first step towards a no-fly zone, and we all know what happens from there. Do you think that the West could use the Libyan scenario as a sort of excuse for intervening in Syria?
Well, the Libyan scenario, to me, is nonsense. I mean, what have we got at the moment? We've got a standoff. See, I think most people have made a mistake about Gaddafi. He was written off in the media, in newspapers and television, as mad. I think it's a complete misreading of the man. I think he's evil, but not mad. I think he set up his whole security apparatus very cleverly over the years. He knows exactly what he's doing. So I don't think that sends any kind of message, except don't get involved in the way that the French and the British have. Don't get involved unless you're prepared to go the whole hog. And the whole hog, frankly, would be targeting him and killing him. So I don't see what lessons that Libya holds for dealing with Syria.
Of course, we've learned a sort of lesson about the NATO allies. I think popular opinion suggests that NATO is divided, it's slow to act, and its goal of protecting the civilians in Libya is really nowhere to be seen anymore. Is NATO, in any case, capable of leading another action?
No, I don't think it is. I mean, everybody's terrified of what happened in Iraq. because most people know that was illegal. But the problem is now, even if NATO could put its act together and say, we must deal with these tyrants, we must really put sanctions on them, if necessary we must follow up with military action, boots on the ground, it wouldn't get through the Security Council. China would veto it. I'm sure Russia would veto it. See, what people don't understand about the United Nations, it's not a self-standing institution. It is the sum total of the hypocrisy of the member states. And unless you can actually have a total consensus, working through the UN actually becomes impossible.
Syria has a good relationship with Iran, which could give Damascus a strong supporter in all of this. Would you expect Tehran to react if NATO did get involved?
I think Tehran will be very worried about what's going on now, because as I understand the situation in Tehran, the present regime probably only has the support of 30% or so of the people. So I think it's got to think very deeply about how it responds to this. But the ties between the regime in Damascus and the regime in Tehran, yes, are very strong. But I also think Hezbollah has a vested interest in what's going on here. I mean, I'm not one of those who write Hezbollah off as a terrorist group. I think Sheikh Nasrallah, Hezbollah's leader, is head and shoulders above all other Arab leaders in the region. I think he's a real leader. And I think Hezbollah has evolved into a truly democratic party. So I don't think it will want any boats rocked either. But if Syria were to fall, I think you're really asking me what would happen. Well, I don't think Syria will fall to the extent that I can't see a scenario in which Syrian security doesn't remain in control. And what the world doesn't know about Syria is that for many years under this present president's father, Hafez, it actually cooperated with Israel. It was actually at times an Israeli puppet. In the '67 war, I tell the full story of this in my book. There was a secret understanding between Syria and Israel before the '67 war. So Syria plays its cards very, very well to survive in this region. It's much too early to write off the regime there, in my view.
And what about the regime in Iran? Some are saying that the entire point of this, the entire goal as far as the Western powers are concerned, is to isolate Iran and thereby force a regime change. Do you agree with them?
No, I don't. The more the outside pressure comes on Iran, the more I think it is going to unite the people of Iran. You see, there is this ridiculous story that Iran wants to develop nuclear weapons. There is absolutely no evidence whatsoever that the regime wants to develop nuclear weapons. I mean, they categorically say they don't. Now, I can see that the Revolutionary Guards may be saying to the Ayatollahs, look, we must develop them for deterrence. But the nonsense of it comes down to this. Supposing Iran did have a few nuclear weapons, do you think it would launch a first strike on Israel? Of course it wouldn't, because Iran would be obliterated. This is just a bluff. And it serves Israel's purpose because it takes the world's attention away from what Israel is doing, which is talking peace and continue to expand its settlements. I mean, Israel must be, actually, its leaders must be very happy with what's going on in the Arab world, actually, because, again, it's taken all the focus away from Israel and it gets on quietly building more and more settlements.
Sort of divide and rule strategy?
Yeah, almost.
How possible do you think it is that in the wake of all these revolutions in the Middle East, Islamists will come to power in the region?
Well, this is a terrifying thing. If we stand back and look how it evolved through Tunisia, through Egypt, what we might call the extremists or the fundamentalist Muslims, they weren't in the game. It was basically very ordinary people of all classes and all backgrounds. Now, if the suppression goes on and on, what that will do is eventually open the door to the extremists. So in my view, the West should now be solidly behind the street, as it were, to bring about the reforms and the changes they want, because that is the way to guarantee that the fundamentalists won't have the oxygen, if you like, to come into the business. It's a huge issue, that.
And what about Israel in all of this? Will it be a less safe place in the future, do you think?
Israel has never been an unsafe place. One of the greatest lies, the mother and father of all lies as it relates to the Israeli-Palestine conflict, is that Israel has been in danger of annihilation. I detail in the 3 volumes of my book, it is a complete lie. Israel's existence has never ever been in danger from any combination of Arab military force, and that is unlikely to change in any foreseeable future.